Mark Granovetter provides a good example of someone who jumps fast out of the starting gates of a career and then builds on that fast start. Born in 1943 in New Jersey, he completed his undergraduate history degree at Princeton in 1965 and then went on to complete his sociology dissertation at Harvard in 1970. After graduating, he taught for 3 years at Johns Hopkins before returning to Harvard to teach for 4 years. He then moved out to Long Island for 15 years to SUNY Stony Brook, eventually chairing the sociology department there, and finally moved to his present job at Stanford University in 1995 after another short 3-year stint at Northwestern University. This 1973 article was adapted from his Harvard PhD dissertation. He submitted an earlier version of the paper to the American Sociological Review while still working on the dissertation, but it was rejected, so this article also illustrates how the process of peer review and subsequent revision can improve a research article. After this article was published, Granovetter expanded its basic idea into a popular book illustrating its basic principles, Getting a Job. This piece is the single most cited journal article ever published in sociology. In it, Granovetter makes a fundamental contribution to what became known as social network theory, suggesting that the kind of strong personal ties, like those found in the primary groups described by Ferris, are not the best way to spread information widely through a larger population. For that, we need what Granovetter calls weak ties, which turn out to be very important in a very different way from strong ties. Sociologists have studied primary groups as a key source of our constructed social identities for more than a century. Mark Granovetter's article, however, introduces us to a different kind of focus that is only about half as old, the study of social networks. Actually, Granovetter's article became so famous and influential because he connected that emerging research on social networks to the earlier attention to primary groups, and in the process he turned some of our thinking about such small local groups upside down. To appreciate his argument, we need to start with some of his basic concepts of social network research. If we look at ourselves or any other individuals in any social setting, we can observe how any particular person interacts or does not interact with other people. Granovetter suggests several features of such interaction that it would be possible to measure objectively, although some features clearly lend themselves to more precise and reliable measurement than do others. One easy thing to measure is just the amount of time that you spend interacting with some other person. We also might measure the content of the interaction. Is it a face-to-face conversation, a text message, a shared meal at home or at a cafe, a hug and a kiss, or perhaps a fist fight? More complex features of the interaction might include what each person gets from the interaction. For example, exchanging some cash for a bag of groceries, exchanging news about other people you each know, and so on. In general, says Granovetter, our interactions vary in terms of each of these features. It may be hard to draw any hard and fast line for such variations, but he thinks we probably can agree that some interactions are strong, happening frequently, lasting for some time, producing important consequences for the people involved, and engaging them with each other as what Ferris and Charles Horton Cooley would have called whole persons. These kind of interactions create and sustain what Granovetter called strong ties between people. Strong ties may not match precisely with the concept of a primary group, but these ideas have a lot in common. Other interactions may be more casual and impersonal, less frequent, or of shorter duration. Granovetter doesn't see such interactions as able to generate strong ties. Instead, they produce what he calls weak ties. You probably have weak ties to a number of casual acquaintances in your life. To represent these ties produced by different patterns of social interaction, we usually represent the strong ties with a solid line and the weak ties with a dotted line, as shown here. So far, this organizes the way we measure and think about any single interaction between a pair of people. But unless you land on a desert island with Robinson Crusoe, you interact all the time with lots of different people. A key idea in Granovetter's article asks what should happen when you form two strong ties to other people. Let's say you are person B in this diagram. If you spend a lot of quality time with A, and also spend similar time with D, as in this diagram, it seems all but inevitable to Granovetter that some of that time you're interacting with both A and D simultaneously. Not only that, but if you like A and you also like D, there's a good chance that A and D both share the kind of characteristics that you find attractive. If they both like you, they also will have that reason to like each other. For several reasons, then, Granovetter proposes that if you have two strong ties like this, it should be almost impossible for the diagram to remain the way it looks here, with no tie between A and D. Granovetter thus proposes that there's a powerful tendency for strong ties to close a local network of people, filling in the missing strong tie between A and D in this case, since they both spend so much time with you and turn out to have so much in common themselves. However, your tie to person C in this diagram is only a weak tie. This might represent your interaction with me as the instructor of this course, or with someone in your dorm or in a neighboring apartment that you don't know very well, but do meet and interact with from time to time. In this case, there's no pressure or strain for your good friends A or D also to form ties to person C. No tendency towards closure or completion of all the possible ties in the network. A and D may never even meet or interact with person C. However, I as person C also have a life. I have strong ties to friends and family that also tend towards closure, towards formation of another local group all knitted together by strong ties. Notice that in my little group here, E does not seem to have a strong tie to F, nor do I have a strong tie to G. Granovetter insists that eventually all these existing strong ties should make it very likely that these missing interactions within my local group also will develop strong ties. But my faculty colleagues and my family have no particular reason why they should start interacting with you, so our BC interaction not only remains a weak tie, but turns out to be the only point of contact between your little group of strong ties and mine. If any information or anything else is going to move between these two groups, it has to go through you and me. The tie between us forms what is called a bridge, because there are no other paths connecting these two local networks. It is crucial to understand this key point in Granovetter's logic. He declares that all bridges like this are always weak ties. Not all weak ties may turn out to be bridges. For example, there could be a weak tie between me as person C and person G in my local group, and that would not be a bridge because information or money or anything else could reach me from person G through the other two members of the group as well. But all bridges are always weak ties. Why does Granovetter insist that this will be true? Just reflect for a minute on what would happen if the BC tie developed into a strong tie. You start coming around my office hours. We talk about social research. I tell you about the article I'm writing to present at a conference. You start getting interested in the topic, and before long, you find yourself talking to person E, who is a doctoral student working with me on the project, and I hear all about your friends A and D. If that BC tie turns into a strong tie, the same strain towards closure that produced the strong tie between your friends A and D starts to open up possibilities for other connections between these two local groups. As soon as that happens, our BC tie is no longer a bridge. There are other paths for information and interaction across the two groups. Strong ties encourage such alternate connections. Weak ties do not, so they can remain bridges. Of course, in real life, we already know that you or I can only sustain so many truly strong ties in life. So the local network of your strong ties will stay smaller than some critical mass beyond which you simply can't keep juggling all those interactions and keeping them all strong, primary relationships. The same holds true for me and for each of the other people in the diagram. So we have local groups or clusters of strong ties and some additional weak tie bridges that provide more indirect context to other people outside these local groups. Now we have all the building blocks of Granovetter's insights. Next, we can see what he built from them. This article's fame and influence came above all from one simple insight that Granovetter pointed out after looking at the patterns of interaction in local groups of strong ties. These local groups look very much like the primary groups described by Ferris as the crucial influences shaping our personal identities and personalities. But the practical limit on how large such primary groups of strong ties can get, coupled with the strain towards closure that tends to fill in any missing strong ties in a local group, means that most, if not all, primary groups composed of strong ties will form self-contained little clusters of social interaction. In contrast, weak ties have no such strain towards closure, so each of us can add a weak tie here and there to our personal social networks without having to worry about dealing with another whole set of relationships from that person's own strong ties. It is a lot easier and less demanding to build a bridge than to build and maintain a cluster of strong ties. And even though these bridges are weak ties, they do still constitute social interactions. They do still have the capacity to carry information. In fact, says Granovetter, the only possible way for a piece of news to pass from person A in this diagram to person J at the other side is for the news to cross two bridges, from B to C and then from G to H. Within each of the local clusters, there are several ways such news might travel to get to B in the first place, and then to reach G in order to cross that bridge, but these two bridges form key links in the only possible path from A to J. Weak ties, says Granovetter, form the crucial connections that allow communication between otherwise isolated local clusters of stronger, perhaps primary ties. The crucial role of weak ties can be illustrated most dramatically if we simply remove the BC weak tie from our diagram. All kinds of information can still pass among the three members of our original group. Paths also remain so that everybody in the other two local clusters can still find out about anything that happens to anyone else in either group over the GH bridge. But now no information at all will ever pass from either of these two clusters back to the original group. These three friends are now isolated from all of the others in the diagram. If you move away from home, for example, going off to college in a place far from your previous friends and family, you yourself may keep in touch with your closest friends and sustain your former strong ties. But you may lose touch with some more casual acquaintance once you're gone. This means that any news you might have picked up from those weak ties not only no longer reaches you, but may also no longer reach any of your friends with strong ties to you. By losing that weak tie, your whole local cluster of strong ties has lost a point of contact with the rest of the world. We'll see how Granovetter applies this fragile but important property of weak ties later. First, though, let's look at some other insights that come from thinking in terms of these social networks. Near the end of his article, Granovetter asks an important question. Are there systematic ways to predict which interactions with people in our lives will result in strong ties and which will end up as only weak ties? More than a decade before Granovetter wrote his article, other research already had documented an interesting example of such determinants of the strength of social ties. To see how social structure, as something larger than any particular individual, can have an impact on that individual's life, just consider how some social facts about people can operate selectively to create friendship networks and strong ties between them. It may seem obvious to you that people feel most comfortable socializing with others who are similar to themselves, and that this also applies to social molecules like married couples, as well as to social atoms of individual persons. If you know people who did not go away to college after high school, you may find that several of them have begun to pair off and form intimate relationships, perhaps even formal marriages, while the people who went on to college mostly remained single. After college, the same thing will happen. One after another, most of your current friends will form such intimate relationships and start living in couples. Not surprisingly, these couples tend to become friends with each other and to form their local clusters of strong ties with this couple status or marital status as one defining boundary. Not only do these couples all share many common interests and concerns, like play groups for their children and the like, but they may also sort themselves into local clusters further defined by income, race, and other social characteristics. Once formed, these local clusters of couples can go on interacting for many years, though particular families may come and go in the neighborhood. But in 1961, Zena Blau published a wonderful little article about what happens when the weaker sex, that's us, the men, begin to die off later in life, or perhaps when one of the couples breaks up through divorce. We have here a local cluster of strongly tied couples, and then the woman at the bottom of the diagram loses her husband somehow, careless of her, but there she is all alone. Suddenly, she doesn't have a partner to attend all the picnics or church services or other activities of the group. When the other men look at her, they may be reminded of their own mortality. When the other women look at her, they may see their futures, or they may even wonder whether she's after one of their husbands. After her loss, at first her friends are faithful to their strong ties and invite her over, call, and visit. But gradually her new difference becomes more and more awkward until, says Blau, she begins to lose those strong ties. Some ties are lost altogether. Others decay into secondary weak ties. She experiences a structural constraint on her friendships and interactions. You may know of situations like this yourself, perhaps from the other end of those relationship histories, as more and more friends form couples and leave you as the last unattached single. But the really interesting feature of Blau's article is that she was studying a group of women as they grew older and older over time. Eventually, most of the husbands of these women died, leaving a growing group of widows behind. And Blau discovered that the first woman who lost her husband, having a head start learning how to cope, emerged as one of the leaders of this growing group of widows. They formed a new local cluster of primary ties based on their new concerns with where to live, how to live in a world without husbands, and generally wear red hats and enjoy each other's company. In the end, Blau found out the remaining married couples, where a couple of husbands had managed to survive, found themselves the odd ones out. Formerly strong ties weakened as interests and life situations diverged, and now the last remaining married couples were the ones experiencing structural constraints on their friendships in old age. These are things that can happen to you that can dramatically affect your life in ways that are completely beyond your own control. So study of social networks can prove very useful indeed. Once he found the right way to present his argument and got his article published on his second try, Granovetter really went to town with his basic idea about weak ties as bridges between local clusters of strong ties. A year after publishing this journal article, he came out with a whole book based on this core idea. The book expanded on his doctoral dissertation research at Harvard, in which he collected information from a sample of people who changed jobs. He wanted to know how they found out about the new jobs they eventually took, and invested a lot of time and effort in tracing the chains of contacts people had used. This book has become a classic too, frequently cited in business schools as well as sociology courses. Granovetter made a lot of money consulting with corporations about recruiting their employees. The bottom line of his research found that, just as you might expect from the article you've read here, it turned out that weak ties were crucial to finding out about promising career possibilities. This book establishes the old saying that it's not just what you know, but who you know, as a scientific fact of occupational life. He was surprised to find that most of the information chains connecting people to their new employers not only ran through weak ties most of the time, but that these information chains were not even that long, usually only a few steps removed between job seeker and employee. The more weak ties were involved, the shorter the chains turned out to be, and the more successful the job search was. Today, people seeking jobs are told to cultivate such weak ties in their lives deliberately. And if they have any doubts about this, they're directed to Granovetter's book for the proof that it works. The same network principles and the same value of weak ties appears in many other contexts not focused on getting a job. If you consider the members of the board of directors of any major corporation in the United States today, each of these business leaders forms mostly weak ties with the other members of that board of directors. They don't want or need, in most cases, to develop these ties into strong primary ties. The weak ties formed sitting around the boardroom table are the most important thing. After the meeting, each of these directors goes off in his or her own direction, and before long is sitting in a meeting of another board of directors for another corporation. In fact, several studies have documented that most of the top corporations in the country are all interlocked in this way with most of the others through the boards of directors, forming what one study called a seamless web of hands across the boardroom table. Information about business trends, labor relations, economic opportunities, and many other tidbits of news advantageous to each company and each executive flow through this network of interlocking weak ties, ensuring business success for all. In case you're not a corporate executive who needs to cultivate all these weak boardroom ties, other aspects of life also demonstrate the usefulness of weak ties. People experiencing desperate personal challenges have found networks of weak ties can be every bit as helpful as a tight little primary group. In some cases, these immediate primary groups have developed some kind of internal dysfunction that may even be the source of the problem itself. Groups like Alcoholics Anonymous, support groups for parents of teens with drug problems, support groups for women who are victims of domestic violence, and many others all demonstrate that sometimes people who gather on the basis of weak ties can even solve problems created by other strong ties, or their loss or absence. Granovetter himself illustrates how weak ties also can play a crucial role in political organization. He gives us the example of the Italian community in Boston known as the West End, where he shows us an area filled with very strong local clusters of tightly knit family groups, but with few or no weak ties between these different families. As a result, when the impersonal machinery of urban renewal seized upon this part of Boston to tear down all the old neighborhood and renew it with new development, these residents had no bridges across which they could coordinate their resistance or even exchange information about the threat itself. This absence of weak ties doomed the entire area to demolition, even though the people had very strong, vibrant, local clusters of primary relationships and flourishing family lives. This example leads Granovetter to ask the next key question. What could have saved the West End? What could have created some weak ties there? This question of what facilitates formation of weak ties, bridging through social networks, has become the subject of a lot of research since Granovetter's article appeared half a century ago. One important answer seems to be participation in organizations larger and more inclusive than just a local cluster or primary group of people. Church congregations are good examples, as are civic clubs and other community-level groups. These organizations create opportunity for interactions between people beyond the boundaries of their immediate primary groups. Such interactions don't have to become primary ties. In fact, as weak ties, they are even more important for coordination of action and the spread of information. From the inception of the civil rights movement in the 20th century to contemporary social justice and environmental movements, organizations that create opportunities to form weak ties have proven again and again to be the key to success. It's no wonder then that Granovetter's article has had such an impact. He literally turned a lot of the earlier emphasis on primary groups as the focus of social research on its head. As he tells us near the end of the article, quote, weak ties, often denounced as generative of alienation, are here seen as indispensable to individuals' opportunities and to their integration into communities, unquote. If the strong ties play a crucial role in formation of the most personal details of your identity, you still have to live in the wider world among a lot of other people you barely know. And to get that job done, you're going to have to depend on those valuable weak ties. The other side of this coin is that success in that wider world is not guaranteed by the quality of your primary group relationships. As he showed us with the examples from Boston's West End, the most powerful, closely knit family groups can find themselves helpless in the face of large, impersonal forces if they lack any connections to other families and other people. Strong ties breeding local cohesion, Granovetter warns us, lead to overall fragmentation in the absence of these same weak ties. The moral of this story seems clear. You will need to pay attention for the rest of your life, not only to your most cherished personal relationships, but also to how you cultivate your more casual, peripheral weak ties that connect you to the rest of your world. Looking for a job when you graduate, as Granovetter guessed when he wrote his book, may be your next big test of this idea.